Hi, I'm Garm and this is Midgardy RPG's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Wade Dyer. How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
I'm pretty well. So you're here today to talk about the new Fragged project, Fragged RPG Regions, right?
Yeah. So it's my latest installment.
All right. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Cool. So yep, of course, I got a Kickstarter coming up at the moment for three new books, and these are expansions for my three most popular settings that are all based on the Fragged rule system, which is a rule system I designed. I got Fragged Empire, which is my primary one. And so I'm doing a book set on the world of Mishpocha, so which is one of the planets. And so that's sort of like lots of maps and lore and things like that. And then the second book I'm doing is for Fragged Kingdom, which is my fantasy setting, which is technically set within the same universe as Fragged Empire, so it's got the same races and stuff like that. But it's set 1,000 years in the future on this obscure, isolated planet where everyone's technologically devolved, and they've mythologized the past. Like, so for example, there's this big mega corporation that just goes by the name Corp in Empire, is now actually like the goddess of merchants and the sea and the moon and stuff like that in Kingdom. And so for that one, I'm doing a book set around the area called the Arcane Bay, which is basically the primary sort of start location for the world. And it's got a lot of, like barbarian tribes and druids are the primary antagonist in this setting. So you got a lot of them and monsters and stuff like that. And also the setting facilitates building castles and holdings and stuff. So it's got a lot of that sort of stuff woven in there as well. And then the third book that I'm doing is for my Fragged Eternum setting, which is a gothic horror setting, which I'm particularly proud of because I actually feel like it's pretty unique within the RPG area, which is pretty. That's a big statement to say, but I'm happy to stand by it. And it's set in this endless city called Eternum that goes forever, and the PCs play as immortal characters. So it's very much a GMs can go wild and just sort of beat the hell out of their player characters, and TPKs are common, that sort of stuff. And it's set. This book is set for them in the Greyberg Market, which is this giant big market, which is like take you like a whole day to traverse from one side to the other. Yeah, and so sort of zooms in, having a look at all the factions and the cults and the fiends and the monsters and the mysteries that are going on in that area. So all of these books are very zoomed in, which is different to my normal sort of approach to world building, which is very often zoomed out and very macro. These ones, a lot of maps, lore, little extra rules, that sort of stuff.
That's super cool. Yeah, I've never had a chance to play any of the Frag games myself, but they're highly recommended.
Cool.
Yeah, my dear.
Hopefully you'll
Oh,
get a chance one day.
hopefully, yeah. I
So
run
much
a
good stuff out there these days.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot. It is both a blessing and a curse in some ways.
Yeah.
And instead, I just play fifth edition all the time. Whoops. Uh, yeah, my friend 8-Bit Ninja, who put us in contact with each other, he's told me that Frag Eternum, if he were to ever run a Dark Souls themed game, that's the game he'd go with because it's the only one that has like the right kind of stuff for that. Which is high praise coming from that
Yeah,
guy.
yeah. So I'm a very much a fan of the Soulsborne series. Oh, sorry, my phone's just going off.
It's all good.
Very unprofessional of me. Okay, that's all. Yeah, so I'm very much a fan of the Soulsborne series, and I make you know put it out there that Eternum is very much inspired by it, but I'm not trying to replicate it perfectly because I don't feel like all of the stuff that fits in those things for a computer game work for a tabletop role-playing game, which are much more social and narrative driven. So those elements are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain light touch that needs to be applied for that kind of adaptation.
Yeah.
Also, the art for Arcane Bay is fantastic. The like image of the Feral Cat Man with the like dodecahedron magic. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. It's my remnant psionic. Yep.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about the individual games? Like, why would you pick Fragged Empire over playing another game like I don't know, Eclipse Phase or FFG Star Wars or something? What's its real like niche?
Oh, yeah, so it's always difficult getting me to compare to all these other RPG systems because I'm I, because I make my own stuff full time. I don't get to play other people's work so much, but I'd say that so sort of the strong bits of Fragged Empire is it's a medium crunch game, classless, very much encourages flexibility in terms of your character creation and item creation. Um, I'd say that the rules are quite different to a lot of other RPGs out there that have a bit of a learning curve at the start, but then once you've got it, it reuses those same rule engines again and again and again. So, just as an example, the core mechanic is roll 3d6, and when you roll a 6, you can do something special. Okay, and that's used for skill rolls and attack rolls and lots of other stuff. So yeah, so if you're, and I'm also very much a fan of, how do you put this? I like both kinds of role playing. So you know how like people say the ROLL and the ROLE, that's just this old RPG sort of trope thing.
Yeah.
I very much like really deep lore. I'm very much into studying why people are the way they are. I love studying culture and politics and religion and stuff like that. So all of my settings have very much a very heavy culture focus, and a lot of cultural tension and exploration and stuff like that. But then also, it's a medium crunch game that I feel like is best played with miniatures on a grid for combat and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's kind of that quick and dirty intro into Fragged.
Legit. I see that you've got I think three of the 4 or 5 settings represented here. I think C is
Yeah.
the only one that didn't make it onto here.
Yeah, so I have other settings. So I producing 3 books at once is basically pushing me to my limit. Okay, and so that's why it's the only reason I primarily restricted it to 3. So that were my 3 best settings. But I've also got Fragged Seas, and I've also got another one called Diesel Punk Mecha, which is just in PDF at the moment. But I love to create, so I keep making new worlds every now and again.
As is the way of our people, yes.
Mm.
Yeah, and yeah, 3 books at once is a lot. It's better to have a reasonable project that comes out on time than something that's let me pick a number of thin air, not referring to any particular project. 5 years.
Uh, yeah, I think that's actually been one of the things that's really helped me in this industry is that I'm quite I really like the production side. Like I like learning about it and getting better at it, and knowing my limits, but also pushing myself to my limits, getting that tension right. Yeah, so I don't know if I'll always be doing 3 books at once, but for now I can manage it.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance, especially as I believe you're entirely independent, aren't you?
Yes, it's just
Yeah.
me, self-published. I mean, I have lots of people who work for me, artists and writers and stuff, but
Yeah, but
yeah.
you're not working for like a major studio or like
Oh
yeah,
no, no. So
yeah,
there's my Kickstarters. That's my budget for the year, basically.
yeah. And then like you have to handle all the logistics and stuff, and that is a skill few people can match the like both the mechanic side, the lore side, and then also the logistics to run the company. It's the downfall of a
Yep.
lot of creators, unfortunately.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about RPGs in general, and which I actually think is part of their appeal, is that they are so multifaceted. They draw people in from such a diverse background, and by that I mean a diverse interest. So you can get the visual artist, you can get the actor, you can get the maths person, the sciencey person, you get the war gamer, you can get all sorts of these people, draw them all in to play it around the table and play the same game. And that is reflected in also the skills needed to create these worlds and these rules. Like that's what makes it hard, but that's what also makes it good. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. My core group has like a couple artists, chemistry major, war gamer. It's
Yeah.
those interests can often be in tension, but it's it's always interesting. So, trying to resist the urge to ask you which one's your favorite because I know that's the worst question to ask.
No, you can ask away. I get this every now and again. So I have look, I definitely think these three settings are particularly special to me. But I'd say that Empire is my favorite, and I think a large part of that is because it's my firstborn child. You know, it's the baby that sort of started this whole thing. And so I have a very special place for Empire. I'll probably be working in that setting for my whole life. I'm really particularly proud of it. Um, I think Eternum's a bit of an interesting one in that I'm proud of it for its uniqueness and its tightness, if that makes sense. Uh, yeah, so Empire's my favorite, I have to say, but then I closely followed up by Eternum from a creative perspective.
All right, fair enough. I adore the corporation, by the way. I've read some of their lore and the bit about one of the other cultures encountering them for the first time. The first thing that they see is like they get bombarded by advertisements. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I found the corporation have been an interesting culture from Fragged Empire. They're like, on the surface, they're like, oh, yep, super capitalist, anarcho capitalist. Everyone understands them. Cheesy name. They kind of look like humans and things like that. But then I find so they're very easy to get initially, but I enjoy how people sort of also get drawn into their depth. How they've like got this whole thing about how they reject their racial identity and how they want people to be valued based on their individual merits, and that's why they embrace capitalism and all that sort of philosophical stuff starts getting woven in there as well.
Yeah, they definitely have a couple of distinct aspects to them, which is interesting,
Mm.
especially as a race with such a monolithic. I don't want to say gimmick, but like focus, as we are a giant corporation to then have that individualism aspect as part of the motivation for that is neat.
Mm.
So why don't you tell me a bit about I'm gonna mispronounce this, and I'm sorry, Mishpacha.
Mishpasha, yeah, it's an old Hebrew word. Um, but yeah, so Mishpasha is so in the Fragged Empire setting. There's this the core system called the Haven system with all different planets, and you got different races on each planet, and stuff like that. But the Mishpasha planet is kind of the frontier world. So it was originally a Kaltoran world, a very big world. It's much bigger than Earth, and it was attacked by the Nephilim, which are these big biotech monstery type race, and they basically made the flora and fauna go nuts. And so they're like turned creatures into monsters and spawned all these horrors and stuff like that, and made the vegetation just cover the world. Um, and so, but Mishpasha is kind of the planet that's not claimed. So all the other cultures are all coming to Mishpasha to sort of claim land and explore ruins and old war battlefields and cities and labs and stuff like that from the war. And also like there's hordes of monsters all through the jungle. So it's kind of that how do you put this? The adventure world. It's kind of the world that's designed for there's lots and lots of stuff to do for games. And so on my book, I kind of have a look at all the different continents and have a look at some of the major cities and things like that. And the book is I'm trying a slightly different writing style as well, and then it's actually my main character from Fragged Empire is called Rachel Swagger. She's a Kaltoran mechanic with ludicrously big black dreadlock hair.
Nice.
And the book is written as it's Rachel Swagger's Guide to Mishpasha. And so it's her telling her about stuff that she's sort of encountered and her interviewing other people. But it's kind of a book about her making a book. So it's, yeah.
A little bit meta, yeah.
A little bit meta, and that gives me a reason to sort of write stories not always from the first person perspective. I can also slip in third person stuff as well, but it adds a flavor because the book's written from a particular angle.
Right. And also gives DMs a little bit of lenience because what's in the book may not be objective fact rather.
Yeah, I actually do that a lot in lots and lots of my books. Is I like to write it from the lore from people's perspective within the world. And so that way, everything is always written with a flavoring to it, which simultaneously tells you more about the person who's writing it and their perspective on the world, but also leaves lots and lots of gaps for GMs to sort of alter and fill in and make the universe their own.
Yeah. Would it be insensitive to call Mishpocha Space Australia?
Space Australia. We're actually very proud that the rest of the world thinks that we're this ridiculously dangerous place.
Yeah, I know it's
then,
exaggerated, but
it's exaggerated. But then at the same time, I know that we're kind of used to it. And like, I grew up with spiders and some of the world's most deadly snakes just around because I grew up in the country in Australia,
yeah.
and they were just normal to me. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's not even just spiders and snakes. The magpies, dude. I don't know if that's one region, but the magpies try and kill you, man.
Yes, I have lots of memories as a kid riding along on my bike and getting swooped and my helmet getting hit by birds who are like trying to attack me. So,
Yeah, I don't know if you know, that doesn't happen anywhere else.
We're so disconnected from the rest of the world that we just, it's all perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm up in Canada. I can't imagine like fearing magpies. They just sit by my window and squawk constantly. Moose, on the other hand, moose are scary, but at least they don't like spit venom at you or come out the sky or something. But yeah, no, Mishpocha looks wonderful. Also, your art team is incredible. I know I already said it, but I'm gonna put some of the images up over your side of the screen in the final cut. But whew,
oh yeah, I give you lots of content for nice thumbnail stuff.
Oh yeah,
my background is a graphic designer, and I've married a fine artist, so I'm a very visual person.
That's fantastic. One of the things I find with tabletop games is that there's often a major weakness in layout. So it's nice to see that not being the case here. I'm just kind of looking at some very small pages.
In my experience, most RPG creators actually come from a writing background. They're primarily authors. And I actually find that if you get people with different skill sets come at game design, they bring a different flavoring and a different emphasis. And graphic design is kind of can get expensive to hire graphic designers because we're used to working for companies and corporations, you know. Companies pay us like $800 to draw a logo, whereas an RPG book might need dozens of logos. So that's a tricky thing.
Yeah, and they still have to look good, which is the real tragic part. Ideally, they're memorable. Ideally, they're good for merchandise. There are a few things I love more than getting pins and shirts with fictional corporation logos on them.
I think one of my crowding achievements is one of my fans actually got one of my logos tattooed on his arm.
Nice.
So I'm like, oh my goodness, that's like achievement unlocked. That's great.
Absolutely. I don't even know what I'd do if that happened to us. I know one of our artists actually one of her friends had some of her art tattooed. I want to say on her back. I'm not sure where it is, but it's something, man. Getting your art on like a living physical person made out of meat is it's crazy. So what made you make that decision to go, all right, you know what, I'm gonna make a sci-fi RPG running on a unique system and I'm going to like devote my life to making it totally kick-ass?
Well, my story's gonna sound cliche. It's like one of those things that are like, oh, this is, of course it happened like this. But so I moved from the country to the city because there's not much graphic design work in the country, and I kind of stepped away from my social circle. So I had to get new friends. So I started playing role-playing games again. I used to enjoy them when I was younger, and I had a lot of spare time, and I was doing a little bit of freelance graphic design work and a bit of youth work. But I thought, well, I'm either going to play computer games in my spare time or I'm going to try and do something constructive. And I love to create. And so I started creating two different RPGs. I started creating a fantasy world first, then a sci-fi world. And as I was playing, I just felt like the sci-fi world was just more unique and interesting. And I just basically got ridiculously carried away with it and started throwing money at it. And I thought Kickstarter was quite big, and it came to Australia. I was very excited because we were one of the first ones for it to come to outside of the States, I believe. And I chucked it up on there. I mean, I put a lot of work into it to get it right and present it well. And I thought this would be a vanity project. I thought I'll put it up there, and I'll need to still put my own money into it, and I'll get this printed, and I'll put it on my bookshelf, and I'll be an old man. I'll be like, oh yeah, that's that book I made once. I'm an author. I thought that's what it would be. But then the Kickstarter went really, really well. And I effectively fired myself from my previous work and became an RPG creator. And then afterwards, people really liked my work. There was an audience. And I just kind of kept at it. I just love to make. I'm basically a GM that got ridiculously carried away.
I think we've all been there where you start kind of tinkering with mechanics and stuff, and then it's 5 days later and you haven't eaten, and yeah. Straight down that rabbit hole. Yeah, no, and it's... Kickstarter has been a wonderful thing for the tabletop RPG community, I think. I've said this before a couple of times on this program, but for somebody from, like, Australia, this would have been so much harder before Kickstarter for you.
Oh, this wouldn't have happened. None of this would happen. Because the RPG industry really is, like, outside of the big boys, it's basically a cottage industry. And lots of people who are making these games they're not in offices, they're working from home, they're working on the side jobs. And we don't get the sales numbers that other industries get, even like board games and stuff like that. And so cutting out all the middlemen and directly connecting creators to customers is amazingly good. I mean, that's why we're getting all these indies projects. Yeah. Although Kickstarter is definitely not quite the Wild West that it was when it first started. It is getting a little more tamed these days, I find.
Yeah, with corporations moving into it in higher and higher numbers, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, you get a bunch of that, but also it's sort of weeding out a lot of the creators. Like customers are getting a little more smart about identifying projects they should back. Back when I first started backing Kickstarters, I've backed a bunch. I swear, like, there was, like, a number of Kickstarters that, like, over-delivered, but then there were a number of Kickstarters where I saw nothing, and it was just disappeared money. And so it's not quite that these days.
Yeah, I've had mixed experiences with Kickstarter. Some stuff's arrived early, some stuff has arrived late. Some stuff they have overpromised so hard that what I actually wanted out of it, I'm never getting. And,
Yeah, that's unfortunate. When stretch goals go nuts, and it's just
Yeah, it was in the early days. I wasn't thinking. Nowadays if I look at that, I'd be like, that project's never that's the part I want is never happening. I'll just save my money. But back then it would have gone to beer anyway, so it all kind of evens out. Yeah. Do you have any feelings on like the general the way the culture of Kickstarter has kind of moved? Like we did just kind of touch on it a bit, but the move towards a safer and smarter environment. Sorry.
I think it's good. I think it's creating more stable businesses and more stable creators. I definitely don't think new creators excuse me. I definitely don't think new creators can't get in. It's a little trickier, but it's kind of like we've swapped a D20 for a 3D6 system. We haven't quite got the wild swing anymore, but it's more stable and balanced, and I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it is certainly. You're certainly a bit more likely to get what you paid for, although there are distinct cases of that not quite happening. Stuff like Mighty Number 9.
Oh yes.
A game did come out, and as the director put it, it's better than nothing.
I think it's interesting. I think the computer game industry has really struggled on Kickstarter, but the board game industry and the RPG industry going very well. I think.
Yeah. The turnaround is certainly a bit faster for tabletop RPGs generally, which helps. because you don't have to. There's not as much prototyping, I guess. I mean, I'm speaking from completely outside the industry. I do this. This is most of my interaction with the industry, but that's my impression from out
well,
here.
well, I kind of treat Kickstarter a lot like Kick Finisher these days. Like
Yeah,
I've already put a year's worth of development and tens of thousands of dollars into these three books already. Because when I first started making them, I wasn't like, I'm going to make them and try and get them funded. I'm like, no, I'm doing these. And I'm just go hard right from the start. And I think having a very stable Kickstarter system, a loyal fan base has given me the confidence to be able to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I am certainly more likely to back a project if it has big notifications saying, "Hey, the writing on this is almost done," but like we just
Mm.
need money for publishing. I'm more
Well,
likely to
that's
do that.
my very first update on my Kickstarter that I'm running at the moment. I actually did a graph with all three books with a little percentage done of art, law, rules, layout, and editing on each one, so people could see where I'm at.
I love that
Um,
graph, by the way. That's some very nice. I guess it's ANSI work there. That's wonderful. Sorry, I cut you off a
no,
little bit
no,
there.
that's fine.
It's
Fine.
very good. I'm sorry. I haven't seen one done in that text format in a very long time.
I think I saw it like on an indie computer game, and I
Yeah.
thought, oh, I really like that. So I just kind of, I don't know, copy it. I like doing different sorts of layouts and stuff.
Oh, that's good. Um,
For those who are listening and can't see it, my graph is laid out with text. It's not actually an image or a JPEG. It's yeah, little
yeah,
colored black boxes and white boxes.
yeah. I'm gonna try and remember to slap it on there. Um, Also, yeah, congratulations on getting like what 70, no 60 some percent in the first couple days. That's pretty good, man.
Yeah, I'm happy. So we're at 71% at the moment. Kickstarter likes to give me lots of graphs, so I get a very detailed breakdown. But I'm really hoping we can get funded soon. I mean, it's always best to get funded as early as possible. And this is actually the highest goal that I've ever had in my previous Kickstarters. Initial goal, um, and we've actually raised money a little bit faster than my previous campaigns. So that's really good. But one of the reasons why I did a higher goal this time is because I didn't want to like break the three books up into stretch goals and just do one and then another. I thought, no, we're going to do all three at once, all of them maximum art and production quality right from the get go. And my stretch goals won't actually be contributing much to these books. They'll actually might be they're little side projects and stuff like that I've got in my head.
Nice. So we did touch on this a little with the talk of like stretch goal overload and stuff. But do you have any tips for somebody who's working on a project and thinks, man, I could put this on Kickstarter and make money, and it will be a stress free experience, and everything will go great.
No, it's always stressful. I mean, this is my fifth Kickstarter, and I got so little sleep the first night. My insides are all knotted up days before. You can't escape that. And I think if it's I'm kind of a seasoned vet, so that stress and strain only goes for like the first week before, a couple of weeks before a launch, and a few days afterwards, and then I'm fine. But if it's your first time doing it, you're probably going to get the stress for the whole time. It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy. I've had a lot of people on here say that they really underestimated how stressful it was going to be.
Mm.
But I mean, it's kind of your livelihood riding on the line, right?
Yeah. It's such a weird thing. It's yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to stress you out more.
No, I'm not stressed at all. I'm very calm. It's just a very difficult psychological state to explain to people because it's such a unique thing. Like an average normal person will go through their entire life and not have this sort of experience of putting a creative project out there, and then it being validated or devalidated by other people, you know. It's yeah, complicated.
Yeah, you're absolutely putting yourself and your projects out on the sphere where bad things happen. Words are really hard. Out in the critical limelight, I guess. I know that's not really what I'm going for. Words are
Yeah,
hard,
no, but
man.
it's kind of that thing where you actually need to put yourself out there and be vulnerable. Like, actually, that's part of what makes a project appealing to people, but also leads to you creating better work. But it also increases your sensitivity to uh, things not going perfectly amazingly well,
Yeah,
and you just have to you just have to handle it. You're like, I've got to be vulnerable. It's gonna hurt, but it's good. The project requires this vulnerability.
yeah. And like one thing I've found is I've backed more than a couple of Kickstarter projects in my time, probably more than I ever should have. But one of the things I've found is that like even if there's delays and stuff, I'm a lot more comfortable with it if the creator's just like, hey, things happened,
Yeah.
rather than just like they drop off the face of the earth for months at a time. That can be troubling.
Well, it all comes down to communication. Like, it's actually, I find that people are perfectly okay with things not going well as long as they know why it's not going well and there's that honesty there. And if I had that, like, let's say I was creating one of these projects and I had some Hollapalooza happen, I just put it out there. Just tell people, hey, look, this has all got messy and complicated. This is what I'm going to do. And I think people can actually enjoy that, enjoying getting a glimpse into the struggle behind the scenes.
Yeah, and you don't need to be super specific. You don't need to be like say what members of your family died or whatever. Just
Yeah, don't
real
give names
life.
and numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like real life happened.
Yep.
Anything else you want to bring up while we're here?
Oh, no, I'm pretty fine.
I'm trying to think of more topics because I'm really enjoying talking to you. This is wonderful.
No, that's perfectly fine. Uh, yeah, feel free to ask me about any of my specific books or more about the creative program project or creative process or the RPG scene or community. Uh, yeah.
So you mentioned that Fragged Kingdom takes place in the far future of Empire, right? Is
Yep.
Seas in the same on the same planet as Kingdom, or
No, no. So Frag Seas is in a particular. It's its own separate universe. It's only Fragged Kingdoms and Fragged Empire linked. I was very much inspired by the whole Warhammer thing. Back when I was a kid, I used to love the idea that possibly Warhammer Fantasy was in the same universe as Warhammer 40k. You
yes,
know, and I'm sure that lore question has been answered, but I haven't engaged with that universe for a long time. But I find that people who are a fan of Empire often like Kingdom because they get to see their favorite races in a different light, in a different way, and it adds that extra depth there. So, for example, in the book, in Fragged Kingdoms, I explain everything from the perspective of that universe and people within that universe. There's no presumption of previous knowledge. But if you do have existing knowledge of Empire, you will have an additional depth of understanding of things that are happening in Kingdom. And sometimes in Kingdoms, I'll do these little pull out boxes and I'll say the truth, and then I'll write it out, you know? Um, so for example, in Kingdoms, Kaltorans can like meditate to draw upon the wisdom of their ancestors and stuff like that. But they've got to be careful not to go too far back or they'll be touched by the darkness.
right.
Okay, so it's all kind of mystical. But then if you know Empire, you know that Kaltorans have genetic memories. So memories of parents are passed on to their children. And they can draw upon that sort of ancient stuff. And so you actually know scientifically what's happening, even though from Kingdom's perspective, it's this purely mystical experience.
That's rad as hell. Ooh, I do have a question about one particular race.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about the Nephilim? They sound super cool.
Yeah. So Nephilim are they're the monster race. They're the race that waged war on all the other races in Empire, and they won. They beat everybody, and then their creator, the Exion, abandoned the Nephilim, and the Nephilim kind of turned feral, and they're basically just monsters. They don't know any. They have no culture, no history. They were created to be killers, and that's all they've ever done. And so 100 years after the war, their leaders basically realized, look, we could wage another war and sort of finish off everyone who survived. But what would be the point? If we're going to survive, we actually need to learn from these other races. We need to learn from their culture and draw upon them. And so they actually forged this tentative alliance. Some of the Nephilim did, not all of them. They're still a wandering monster Nephilim. And so that's kind of the Nephilim's short and dirty backstory. But from a world creating perspective, they also occupy the whole. If players want to play a really strange alien, because they could be like four-armed giant monstrosity or a tiny little slug that eats people's brains. That's Nephilim, okay? And so people can play these really strange aliens that they create themselves, but they all come from a single culture. So for me as a world building, I can just write about a singular culture and I don't have to constrict them to a certain physical attributes. So it gives players a lot of freedom to basically play almost whatever they want, but then they've still got this firm context that's woven into the other races and the history and the narrative of the universe. Yeah. Oh, and Nephilim in Fragged Kingdoms are basically seen as nature demons. So they are, yeah.
They're the things that go bump in the night.
They're the things that go bump in the night, and like seeing a Nephilim is kind of like seeing a demon. It's like, oh my goodness, this is a spawn of so they're the goddess of nature, of life and death. She's called Neph. And they're basically like they call them the spawn of Neph, and it's kind of like
kind of backforming it from Nephilim, yeah.
Yep. So they have a very different cultural context in Kingdoms than they do in Empire.
That's super cool. Oh, I see that you're adding a couple new races in the Empire part of this. What are the Oni?
Yeah. So there's three new sort of race options. So the Oni are a specific breed of Nephilim. They're these giant four-armed, sort of brutish creatures, but they don't stop growing. And so they've been growing since 100 years from like when the war happened. And so their leaders are just utterly ginormous. So like the ones who existed back during the war. And we're still developing the lore on them, so I can't tell you too much about them. But basically they're an alternative perspective to the Nephilim that the players could go at in the classic setting. So in the classic Empire, it's called the Eden Brood. It's this particular Nephilim on the planet Eden, and they're sort of the ones players often come from. This is a perspective of a different Nephilim brood and how it formed differently and had sort of a different trajectory. And they come from a very different system, and they're basically these slavers in these giant ships that fly around and consume resources and people and everything like that. They're a big bad guy faction. Yep.
Literally big, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Anything else you want to bring up while we're here?
No, that's covering most of it. I know we haven't touched on a turnip much at the moment.
Right. Yeah, if you want to talk about a tournament, go for it. Like I said, I have friends who are big fans of it, and I really want to check it out sometime.
So I found a turnip's been interesting. It's been one of so let me explain this. So fantasy, as we all know, is a massively popular genre within the RPG scene. So what this means is that when I release Kingdoms, it's lots of potential customers because lots of people like fantasy, but it doesn't necessarily create lots of buzz because there's so much existing stuff out there already. So it's going to be so sales are going well. A Turnum is different in that it's created a lot of buzz because it's unique, um, and so it's selling a lot there. And I'm very, because I don't, how do you put this? Uh, I don't actually know of any other RPG world like it, even though it draws on a lot of tropes in that it's got like werewolves and vampires and fiends, which are like kind of like demons, and all that sort of very classic sort of feel stuff. Often, a lot of those horror RPGs are quite rules like, very narrative heavy type ones, whereas this is actually a medium crunch sort of setting, even though its rules are a little bit simplified from the other fragged games. I've kind of streamlined it a fair bit more. Um, yeah,
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty cool. And it's got a lot of strange stuff going for it. I hear like accessible, but certainly yeah, different than what you've done before.
mm,
Yeah, like you said, there's a high demand for fantasy, but there's also a pretty high supply.
yeah,
All right, I think that about wraps it up.
cool.
Uh,
Thanks so much for the chat.
yeah, Wade,
That
it's
was lots
been
of fun.
yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. If you ever have another project, feel free to hit me up.
Thanks so much. Once this goes live, feel free to send me a link and I
Will
can post it around.
yeah, and for everybody at home, have a good night.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.